This will be the most useful Photoshop video you'll ever watch. I've condensed down my 15 years of Photoshop experience into the most valuable information I've learnt during that time. All of those eureka moments of realization that have helped me understand how Photoshop truly works have been put into this video. I've designed these individual lessons to be equal parts relaxing and productive. So we're going to cover a lot of ground, but without it ever becoming overwhelming or stressful. So all that's left is for you to grab your hot drink of choice, and let's learn some Photoshop. Lesson 1. Ignore the menus. Mostly. One of the first reactions I had when I started using Photoshop was to be disturbed by all the many icons that confront you when you open the program. Every Adobe product instantly hits you with what feels like hundreds of different tools, menus, submenus, and you are shown them all at once. On the surface, there seems to be 2 to 3 different ways to achieve what at least appears to be the exact same end result. To some extent, learning to get past this wall of things is a necessary stage of the Adobe software way of life, unfortunately. But I will share a few pieces of advice that will help make that learning process much quicker and less stressful for you. Firstly, Photoshop is a program that is designed for a variety of users. It is a very versatile and flexible piece of software. While there are people who use Photoshop chiefly for editing photographs, there are also those who use it primarily as an art program. A lot of people use Photoshop for typography-based work, but you can even use it to manipulate videos or create animations. To demonstrate this for you, I can quickly go up to the Window and then Workspace menu. While we will not be changing workspaces within this video, you can see Photoshop gives you the option of changing how the program appears depending on how you wish to use it. Changing the workspace from the Essentials default option to another one brings out the most commonly used menus within that new creative workspace we select, while at the same time hiding the ones that chosen profession tends to ignore. As an example, changing our workspace to Motion, which is intended for video and animation projects, gives us a timeline at the bottom of the screen. Graphic and Web instead doesn't have a video timeline, but it instead makes the text editing menus more easily visible. All of these individual elements can be found in the Window menu, and you can tick them on or off depending on if you wish them to be visible for you or not. You do not have to be within a certain workspace to use any of them. You can be working in Graphic and Web and turn on the timeline, for example, which you might wish to do if you wanted to create an animation with text, for instance. The point being that while you have many tools and menus presented to you, there will be a lot of options in Photoshop that you either never use or use maybe occasionally every few years. Once you know how to find the tools and menus that you need to use frequently, you learn to just automatically ignore the rest of them. And that does not mean that the rest of the tools are not there if you ever need them. It's like with any other profession. A mechanic would not be expected to instantly know how to repair every single make of car from memory, and a surgeon, however skilled they are, would not be required to immediately know how to perform any type of operation without researching it first. So don't ever worry about knowing the entire program inside and out. Just learn what you use every day and look up anything else when you need to. If you have to look up how to do something multiple times, you'll memorize how to do it automatically. And if you don't find yourself using that tool or menu often enough to have to memorize it, you probably don't need to remember how to instantly find it. And this brings us perfectly to the concept of shortcut keys. There is usually a way of more quickly accessing tools or menus in Photoshop. A series of ever deeper menus may be instead replaced by quickly hitting 2 or 3 keys on your keyboard. But please do not feel that learning shortcut keys is a requirement to be a professional within Photoshop. The purpose of shortcut keys is only to speed up your workflow. Knowing them can improve your speed at using the program, but not the quality of your work. So I would always focus first on raising the quality of your work, then on improving the speed that you can create that same high quality of work in. Shortcuts should only be the nitro boost for your Photoshop car, to give it that extra bit of a turbo speed boost, with the boost only being used after you can fully control it at regular speeds. I made sure to include shortcuts for this video, despite me not feeling they are great for beginners, as I hope this video can also work as a reference source that people come back to in the future. I've also made sure that this video has accurate subtitles, so if I ever move slightly too quickly over a particular shortcut, you can turn those captions on to see exactly what I pressed. But again, they are not required for knowing how to use Photoshop. I would recommend learning shortcuts for the tools that you use frequently, over time, but otherwise do not worry about them. To end this first chapter, I will give you a few additional tips and tricks which will help you to master menus. If you find that the text and icons in Photoshop are too small for you, there are a few things you can do. Firstly, you can change the text size by going to the Edit menu and navigating to Preferences, and then Interface. This menu allows you to make a lot of changes to Photoshop, including to the default colour of the program. On a Mac, you may find these options under the Photoshop menu, then Preferences and Interface. In terms of visibility, we can change our UI or user interface font size to large and press OK. We will need to close and reopen Photoshop to see this change, but with the change in place, our text is larger. We can also scale up our layer thumbnail images here on the right. We simply click this little menu icon on the top right of the layer panel and select Panel Options. Here we can choose a larger size of preview, and again, we press OK to make that change. Another thing to remember is that if an icon on the left side toolbar has a tiny triangle on it, that indicates that holding down your mouse while clicking this tool will reveal additional tools to select. These hidden tools are usually very similar to each other, as they are grouped on a theme. So for example, the Blur tool hides the Sharpen tool and Smudge tool, while the Rectangle tool, which you can use to create rectangles, hides tools for creating other shapes, such as polygons and triangles. So if you are looking for a tool and you cannot find it, it may simply be hidden under another tool. If you find that your Photoshop software has changed appearance since you last used it, or you close a menu and lose tools that you needed, it is always possible to go up to that Workspace menu that I mentioned before within the Window menu, and then reset whichever workspace you are using to its default original appearance. Doing this will bring those lost menus back to you, and make things look as they originally did. If you ever wonder what a tool does in Photoshop, you can hover over a tool and you will get these fun little previews explaining what the tool does. You can even click to see a short video made by Adobe to demonstrate the tool performing its intended job. If for any reason these previews of the tools do not appear, they may be switched off in your preferences. If you wish to turn them back on in that situation, you can go to Edit, Preferences, and then Tools, and turn on Show Tooltips and Show Rich Tooltips. On a Mac, this may be under the Photoshop menu, then Preferences and Tools. And finally, for this section, if you want to learn a shortcut in Photoshop, the combination of keys needed to open a menu item is usually listed next to that menu selection in Photoshop. So while we can go to the Layer menu and press New and Layer, we see that we can also press Shift and Control and N, at least on Windows. It would be Command and Shift and N on a Mac. I will put a linked list of the default shortcut key combinations in the description below, for anyone who wishes to look into them more. Again, I would not recommend getting too caught up in learning them as a beginner, but you learn the way that you feel comfortable learning. If shortcuts are for you, feel free to dive into learning them. With that covered, and when you are ready, let's move on to Lesson 2. Lesson 2. Pixels, the secret to everything. It's very easy to think about how Photoshop operates in a very literal sense, based on the terms typically used within the program, and then to feel overwhelmed with the depth of required knowledge that Photoshop seems to want from you. You will hear terms like lighting, shadows, painting, focusing, blurring, sharpening, and so on. I can say personally, from my own experience, that the idea of having to relight things in Photoshop seemed like an incredibly complicated idea. But rather than think about any of those things in a literal sense, you really only need to think of one thing: pixels. I personally found that thinking about images in a more microscopic sense actually made the entire program a lot easier to understand. I will explain why that was now. To understand exactly what's happening when we edit an image, we need to zoom deeply into a picture to be able to see the individual pixels that make that image. Like our world is formed from individual atoms, digital images are made from individual pixels. We can zoom into our image to see these pixels by holding down the Control key and pressing the plus key, or the Command key and plus key on a Mac. We can then zoom in until we start to see these individual small squares appear. These are our pixels. Pixels are aligned on a grid. We can actually see this grid by either pressing the Control key and the H key at the same time, or by pressing the Command key and H key if you're using a Mac. This shortcut shows or hides guides within Photoshop, such as the pixel grid. You can also go up to the View menu and click Show, and then Pixel Grid. On a Mac, you may be asked if Command and H should be used to show or hide grids, or instead hide Photoshop as a program when you use it. If you run into problems, I've placed a link below which explains how to fix this in Photoshop. If there are problems, it is because, by default, Command and H hides applications on Macs, and it shares that same command with Photoshop. Or you can just use the menu method I listed above and ignore the shortcut. Regardless of if an image is a high-resolution photograph or a low-quality drawing, it will be made up of pixels when you zoom into it far enough. In knowing this, let's look at what is happening on a pixel scale view when we make changes to our image. Here I have a tiny square made out of pixels. You can see how small it actually is here on the right, when we're not zoomed in on it. So if I apply a blur to these pixels, we can see that all that is actually happening is that the pixels that were previously black are now grey, and that the white pixels, which were surrounding the square, are now lighter shades of grey, to create the illusion of a blur spreading outwards. So nothing has actually been blurred, as we may typically understand it. 8 black pixels have been converted into many more pixels of grey to complete the effect. We can see that something very similar occurs with the smudge tool when we drag outwards from the pixel square. And if we use the sharpen tool repeatedly, we can see that all it is actually doing is changing the shades of grey to black again. It is doing this to make the softened grey shape into more defined and sharper dark pixels again. So while tools may have fancy names, all they will ever actually be doing to alter the image is changing the appearance of the pixels which form it. Even if I go to our filter menu and choose to render a lens flare, we can see that when we zoom into that lens flare, it is made up of different coloured pixels, nothing more. No form of extra light has been added in any way, just changes to the pixels that create the illusion of a light. I find it good to think of Photoshop as a magician, and pixels are how the magic tricks are performed. Theoretically, if you were patient enough, you could take a white canvas, such as this one, and slowly paint in a photograph, 1 pixel at a time. If you were good enough at this, there would be no way to tell the painting made from individually hand-painted pixels from a genuine photograph. Pixels are pixels, it doesn't matter where they came from. When a phone or digital camera says it can capture an image in a certain amount of megapixels, the amount of megapixels is how many millions of pixels it can capture at once. With a 12 megapixel camera capturing 12 million pixels, for example. I'm not saying it would be fun to hand paint 12 million individual pixels, but if you were determined enough to do that, there would be no difference between your hand-painted pixels and the ones automatically produced by the camera, aside from the hand strain that was used in creating them. I think it's really useful to demystify how Photoshop actually works. Knowing that images are made entirely of pixels really helps you to understand that different tools are often just different working methods to change the same pixels. With pixels covered, and when you are ready, let's learn about the world of layers. Lesson 3. Layers are your friend. So, while we've learnt to think of Photoshop in terms of pixels, we gain even more understanding about how images work when we also think of them in terms of layers. You can create multiple layers of pixels and then stack these layers of pixels on top of each other, and as we'll see shortly, that allows you to do some pretty incredible things. There are so many layers to working with layers that some of the things I'll talk about today I only learnt fairly recently in my Photoshop journey, which is at least a good way of demonstrating that our Photoshop knowledge can always be added to. When you're working with multiple layers, nothing will look very visually different. The image itself will look much the same as when we were working with just a single layer. However, with the use of multiple layers, we gain the power to easily change any part of our image file separately, without affecting the other parts. We can also replace layers at any time in the stack. You don't like this background? Let's replace it. You want different text? Changing it is as easy as double-clicking that text layer. So in the bottom right of Photoshop, we have the Layers panel. If for any reason you can't see the Layers panel, we can go back to the window menu we looked at earlier, and from the drop-down menu it brings up, click Layers to show it. By default, you should have this white background layer as a starting point. It's always good to keep our files organised when possible, so let's rename this layer. We can do this by double-clicking on this layer's name. If this is the first time you've done this within a project, double-clicking the layer will bring up this dialog box, where we can type in a new name and press OK. If you're instead renaming a layer at a later point, double-clicking the existing name will simply highlight it, and we can type in a replacement name and press the Enter key. If you'd prefer to rename a layer via menus, you can go up to the Layer menu and select Rename Layer. Then simply type in your new layer name and press the Enter key. There's a few things to cover here with these various icons in the Layers panel, but we will go over them one by one. As much as there are quite a few icons associated with this Layers panel, all of them are fairly straightforward to understand once you've seen them being used. We'll start with the most obvious starting point, adding more layers. In the bottom right corner, we have this little addition sign icon. As the icon would suggest, it allows you to add a new layer. So let's click it. Upon doing so, we now have this layer 1 added to our layer stack. Everything looks identical with our project for now. We can still see our white background, for example, from the original default layer. This is because there is currently nothing on our newly created layer. Let's have a bit of fun with this new layer to show what layers can do. This lesson will be a little more hands-on than the previous ones, but I think the easiest way to demonstrate layers is to show them in action. Feel free to watch this section through for the first time without following along, before re-watching it a second time more practically, if you would prefer to work that way. So, firstly, we'll double-click our Layer 1 layer name, and I will change it to be called Green Drawing instead. If you're following along, the name of the layer and colour of our drawing do not matter. I've chosen personally to go with green, but the colour doesn't make a difference for this example. To create the image for this new layer, I'll click the paintbrush icon on the left toolbar, or I can simply press the B key on my keyboard as a shortcut. For the green in the green drawing, I'll go up to the Colour panel in the top right and use the rainbow coloured bar and the gradient of colours to choose a tone of green that I like. Before I start drawing, it's important to make sure I have the correct layer selected. After all, I want my green drawing to be on the green drawing layer. It's easy to see which layer is currently selected, as it will be highlighted as we can see here. You can switch between layers by simply left-clicking on the layer that you wish to work with. So with our correct layer selected, we can begin to paint our image onto that layer. As you may be able to tell, whatever knowledge I have gained over the years about using Photoshop has not really helped me learn how to draw. Hopefully, your drawings will look a bit better than mine, but since we're only using this drawing for testing layers, it doesn't really matter what your drawing looks like. You can just put a little drawing of a swirly circle if you're following along. The image you create doesn't have to be fancy. With our drawing complete, we can start to understand how our layer stack is functioning. Next to each layer is a little eye icon, which controls that layer's visibility. If I quickly click the eye next to our green drawing layer, you can see our drawing disappears, but our layer is safe, nothing's been erased. All we have done, by toggling off this eye icon, is make it so this layer is no longer visible to us as a user. If I press the eye again, our layer reappears. If we did want to delete this layer more permanently, we have this little trash can icon in the bottom right corner. If we press this with a layer selected, that selected layer would be deleted. But don't worry about hitting this button accidentally. By default, Photoshop asks you if you are sure you want to delete a layer. If you are worried about deleting layers by mistake, feel free to create a new layer, make sure it's selected, and delete it now. That way, you will know that deleting a layer is not something you can easily do by accident. And if you ever do accidentally delete a layer, remember that you can use the Undo tool to undo deleting a layer. That's with Ctrl and Z or Command and Z on a Mac, and you will have it safely returned to you. Instead of deleting any layers, we're instead going to add another one. I feel our frog needs a lily pad to sit on. So again, we can click the Add Layer button. Photoshop will always add a layer above whichever layer was selected when we hit the button. With the new layer added, we can then rename this new layer Lily Pad. I also intend to make this lily pad blue. Therefore, I'll change my paint colour to a blue instead of our frog green. With our lily pad layer selected, I'll draw the lily pad underneath our frog. However, we'll see that we currently have a problem. We can again zoom into our image to see this issue more clearly by holding down the Ctrl key and the plus key, or the Command key and plus key on a Mac. We can also temporarily hold down our spacebar key to convert our cursor into a little hand icon. Now, when we move the mouse, while the spacebar is held down, we can pan over our image without making changes to it. If we want to stop panning over our image, we can simply stop holding down the spacebar. Now we are zoomed into our image, we can see that the green lines of the frog are underneath the blue lines of the lily pad. So currently, our lily pad is sitting on top of our frog. Thankfully, this is a very easy thing to fix. In our Layers panel, the lily pad layer is currently above the frog layer. For this reason, the lily pad will be on top of the frog in our image. All we have to do to fix this is click and hold down our left mouse button on our lily pad layer, and drag it below our frog drawing in the layer stack. Now, the green lines of the frog will sit above the blue lines of the lily pad. Just make sure not to drag our lily pad layer below the white background layer, as then it will be covered and concealed by our background. But if that happens, it's easy enough to drag the layer back to its correct place in the centre of this stack. Frog on the top of the stack above the lily pad, white background on the bottom below the lily pad. We can zoom out of our image again by using Ctrl and the minus key, or Command and the minus key on a Mac. Or we can press Ctrl or Command and the 0 key to make our image automatically zoom out to fit our screen. There's a lot more to cover with layers, but I thought I'd put a little pause in this section here if you want to take a short break, or maybe even return to the video another day. It's not that the next stages with layers are any more complicated. There are just so many different things you can do with layers that it can be a lot to take in all at once. But when you are ready, let's continue to explore the world of layers. So let's say we next wanted to change the colour of our frog. Instead of having to repaint it using a new colour, We can instead easily change the colour of any layer by using a special type of layer called an adjustment layer. This ball icon, that is half black and white, brings up our Add Adjustment Layer menu. There are a lot of different adjustments you can make to your image using these adjustment layers, and I'd encourage you to experiment with them in the future. But for now, we're just going to select to add a Hue and Saturation adjustment layer. Having added it, we initially see no visual change has occurred with the image. This adjustment layer, by default, maintains the image as it is. We need to change some settings with the adjustment layer to actually have it make changes to our image. With our adjustment layer selected, we can see the controls for it above the Layers window. We have sliders we can adjust named Hue, Saturation and Lightness. We also have a few extra options which allow us to make more specific adjustments, but they're not relevant for this tutorial, so don't worry about them for now. Adjustment layers are a little different from regular layers, since you can't add to them directly, like how you can paint on a regular layer. Instead, they work more like putting a filter on a camera lens. By adding a filter to your photographs, you're not altering the actual subject that you're photographing, only how the camera is capturing it. An adjustment layer works in that same way. An adjustment layer does exactly what the name suggests. It is designed to adjust, and therefore make changes to, existing layers. So, going back to the controls for our Hue and Saturation adjustment layer, let's experiment with changing our Hue slider. By dragging the Hue slider with our mouse, we can see that the colours are changing in our image. However, adjustment layers work on every layer below them in the layer stack by default. So both our frog and our lily pad are having their colours altered by this adjustment layer, since it is placed above them. If we were to drag our lily pad layer above the adjustment layer, we can see that now only our frog's colour is being altered, as our lily pad would be sitting safely above the adjustment layer in the stack. Unfortunately, this isn't a solution to the problem, as now we return to the issue of the layers being in the wrong order again, with our lily pad once again being on top of our unfortunate frog. Thankfully, there's an incredibly easy way to make an adjustment layer only affect the layer that we want to alter. Having dragged our lily pad layer back to its correct position under the frog, we can right-click our adjustment layer and choose to Create Clipping Mask. One thing I want to quickly say for Mac users specifically is that depending on your Mac and its settings, you may have found that right-clicking just then didn't work for you. Some Macs are set up to use one mouse or trackpad button only, while others are not. So if you found that right-clicking didn't work for you, I have put a few links in the description which should help you out. With us having right-clicked and selected to create a clipping mask, we now have this little arrow on our adjustment layer, which indicates that it has been attached or clipped to the layer directly below it in the stack. In this case, we have clipped our adjustment layer to our frog layer, meaning that any adjustments we make to that hue and saturation layer only affect our frog and not the lily pad or any other layers we choose to add to our stack. If we wish to have that adjustment layer affect the other layers once again, we can right-click on our adjustment layer and choose to Release Clipping Mask. You can alternatively create or release clipping masks in the Layer menu. It's also possible to group together layers within Photoshop. This is both useful for making your Photoshop file more organised, but it also allows you to clip an adjustment layer to more than one layer at a time. To group together layers, we first need to highlight all the layers that we wish to have within that group. There are two ways to select multiple layers. You can select multiple neighbouring layers by holding down the Shift key as you click the first and last layer of the sequence that you wish to select. Any layers in between those two layers you click will also be selected. Or you can hold down either the Control key, or if you're on a Mac, the Command key as you click the layers, to add multiple disconnected layers to your selection. With multiple layers highlighted, we can right-click on them and choose to Group from Layers. We then name this new group. Now we can add an adjustment layer and clip it to this group of layers in the same way that we previously clipped it to an individual layer before. We can also right-click on a group at any time and ungroup layers if we wish. As a few little words of advice, it's possible that new layers may be automatically added to the inside of a group. If this happens, you can toggle Open a Group with this little arrow on your group layer and simply drag layers from within a group back out to the main layer stack. Also, if you're trying to group layers, and those layers happen to include your background layer, by default, the Group from Layers will be greyed out and impossible to click. This is because our background layer starts out as locked, as this little padlock icon suggests. Locking layers is a great way to prevent changes being made to a layer accidentally, but it does rather limit what you can do with them. To remove this padlock, so you can group this background layer, we can simply double-click our padlocked background layer to rename it, and the lock will automatically be removed. We can see that without the padlock, it's possible to group that layer with other layers again. If you ever want to lock or unlock your own layers, you can press this little lock icon with your chosen layer selected. The last two options I want to talk about with layers are a little more advanced, so I'll only touch on them slightly here, as I feel they go outside of the reach of this beginner-friendly video. I will leave links to individual tutorials for these layer controls in the description if you wish to deep dive into them more. However, this following quick look will give you the essential information on what you can do with them. Don't worry about following along with this next section. This is just a demonstration of what can be done with layers once you truly master them, which I am sure you will do in time. Layer styles. First up, layer styles are super cool, and if you have not used them before, I think you will have an amazing time experimenting with them. A layer style is basically an effect that you can apply to an entire layer. You can find them all under this little FX icon in the layer panel. Here I've got our frog drawing from earlier, and I'm going to add a simple drop shadow to our frog to make it appear that it is truly sitting on our lily pad. I can do this by selecting our frog layer, clicking the FX icon and selecting drop shadow. Doing this opens our layer style panel and gives us the controls for our drop shadow. We can change the direction of the shadow, change the opacity of it, how soft it is, and so on. We can then press OK when we are happy with how it looks. As you can see from the FX menu, there are a lot of different effects to experiment with, and you can get some really interesting and quick results to make your work stand out in interesting ways by using them. Blending modes. Next up, blending modes alter how a layer appears within a layer stack. With a layer selected, we can see this little drop-down box, which will usually say Normal. That normal refers to how that layer will be blended into our image. In this case, normally, and in the standard, expected way. However, we can click this little drop-down box to bring up an entire list of different blending modes. From this list, we can see that they are roughly grouped into different types of blending mode. For this video, I'll very quickly demonstrate just one of these blending modes, which I am very familiar with. It will perfectly show what you can do with them. We have here a picture of this handsome chap. Now, let's say I wish to alter the colour of my eyes. Well, we can actually use a blending mode to do exactly that. I can create a new layer, as we did before, and begin to paint in a new eye colour. Now, in normal blending mode, we just have a solid colour painted over my eyes. If, however, we change our blending mode on this new layer to colour, we see that the eyes from the layer below are visible again, and only the colour information from our new layer is being used when we are in that colour blend mode. In essence, you can usually think of a blending mode as a filter for that layer, allowing some things to pass through from a layer and restricting others. We saw that process here, with the colour from the new layer passing through to the layer below it. That is a little bit of a simplification, but it is broadly how they work. As I say, I will link to some more in-depth videos below explaining both layer styles and blending modes. I highly recommend learning about them in more detail when you're comfortable with the rest of the information within this video. When you're feeling confident with what layers can do, and their future potential as you become a more advanced user, we will move on to the next lesson and learn how we can make the process of undoing mistakes a million times easier, which will, in turn, make the process of experimenting as you learn a lot more rewarding. Lesson 4. Destructive and non-destructive editing. As you learn Photoshop, you're going to make mistakes. There is no way to avoid that. In fact, you do not want to avoid making mistakes. The best way to learn anything is to make those mistakes, as it motivates you to repair them and then not make them again in the future. Everything I have ever learnt on computers, I learnt from messing things up and then having to spend time working out what I did wrong. So never be afraid to make mistakes. They are the greatest teacher you can find. Unfortunately, with Photoshop, it can be far too easy to work in a way that makes it nearly impossible to correct your mistakes later. While repairing mistakes can be very educational and rewarding, if you are not able to easily repair your mistakes, the process of learning becomes very frustrating instead. Thankfully, as someone who has made many mistakes during my time using Photoshop, I can show you ways of working that guarantee that any mistakes you make are only ever a few seconds away from being fixed again. This will be the case even if you return to a piece of work months or even years after you made those initial mistakes. These methods are also fairly simple to learn, but we will start by explaining why the most obvious tools for correcting mistakes should not be used, or at least why they should not be relied upon. So you may already be familiar with the Undo feature, which is within the Edit menu, or by pressing Ctrl and Z or Command and Z if you're on a Mac. It allows you to undo mistakes that you've recently made. It's an amazing way to quickly undo a mistake that you have only just made. Its biggest weakness is that you only have a limited number of undo steps within Photoshop. So if you notice your mistake later on, after a few more changes have occurred, it may be too late to correct it. Even if you do notice the mistake in time, you may have to undo your way through good stages of work that you did after the mistake to get back to it. There is a more advanced form of the Undo tool called the History panel. It can be reached under Window and then History. It allows you to jump through multiple stages of your project, including earlier points before you made the mistake. However, despite this being a better form of undoing mistakes, both the History panel and the Undo option have the same major drawback. Both Undo and the History panel only save your work steps until you close Photoshop. When you reopen the program, even if it's only seconds after you closed it, it will have entirely wiped clean the list of undo steps. So even if you notice a mistake a few days later, maybe after a teacher or even worse a client has pointed it out to you, you will not be able to simply undo it. You could lose hours of progress simply trying to fix a mistake that you made near the start of the project. Thankfully, there are ways of working that make both Undo and the History panel things that you never really need to worry about using at all. The key here is the difference between destructive and non-destructive editing. Destructive editing, as the name suggests, is changes to your file that are permanent. While destructive editing can be corrected by a timely use of Undo or the History panel, it cannot be repaired outside of those tools and their limited time use. Non-destructive editing protects your file as you work, and it allows you to make multiple changes and corrections at any point during the creative process. I will now tell you about 3 amazing ways to work non-destructively, which will genuinely change the way you use Photoshop forever. Cropping. The simplest way to demonstrate non-destructive editing is with the crop tool. We can find the crop tool over here on the left-hand toolbar, or by hitting the C key. With it selected, we will see a menu at the top of Photoshop, which gives us additional controls over our cropping. We have a tick box named Delete Cropped Pixels. With this box ticked, when we crop our image, everything outside of our chosen crop is permanently deleted. If we later decide that we perhaps cropped too much, we may try to increase our crop outwards again, to bring the lost sides of the picture back. But when we try this, we will see that we no longer have those sides of the image. This loss of information is due to that box being ticked in the crop settings. If we instead make sure that this box is unticked, our original file is always protected outside of those cropping lines. We may not be able to always see the sides that have been cropped, but at any point we can easily bring that image information back by simply extending the boundaries of our crop again. Whilst this is a relatively minor example of non-destructive editing, it demonstrates just how much easier you can make the process of correcting your mistakes, or even just creatively changing your mind, later on. Smart objects. One of the best ways to generally protect your files and keep the ability to change them later is to use something called smart objects. The best way to think about smart objects is to think about them in the same way you might think about a plastic protective wallet for paper. If you were to directly write on a piece of paper, there's nothing you can really do to remove this ink again, and the piece of paper would therefore be forever marked with it. If, however, you were to first put your piece of paper within a plastic protective wallet like this, the paper inside it would be protected from harm. You could draw on the outside of the plastic wallet as much as you wanted to, but at all times your paper inside would be clean, as if nothing was ever written on it at all. Smart objects in Photoshop work in that exact same way. Any layer you place within a smart object is protected from harmful changes, and they are incredibly easy to use. To create a smart object, we simply right-click a layer and choose to convert to smart object. We will do it to this layer with these curved shapes I have drawn. With that done, this little icon on our layer indicates that it is now a smart object. To show what is happening, and prove just how powerful a smart object can be, we simply have to double-click this layer icon. At first, it may appear that the rest of our project has gone missing, leaving only our smart object layer. However, if we look at the top of our Photoshop window, we can see that we now have two projects open instead of one. Clicking our first project, the one on the left, brings us back to our original file. Clicking instead on our second project brings us back to the newly opened project. What we're seeing in this new project is the inside of our smart object. To go back to our paper comparison, the project on the left shows our layer in its plastic wallet version, and the project on the right is our paper inside the wallet. Double-clicking on our smart object opened the envelope for us to be able to make changes to our layer within the smart object, if we so wish. The changes we make to this newly exposed layer may be more permanent again, as it would be with changes made to the paper outside of the plastic envelope. But if we instead make those changes to the smart object layer in our original file, the layer inside the smart object remains protected. I'll show an example now to more clearly demonstrate how this layer and smart object relationship works within Photoshop. I'm going to add a layer style to this smart object. In this case, I will add a drop shadow. While it's always good to experiment with the many layer styles hidden within the FX menu, don't worry about following on for this explanation if you don't want to. It's not required. With a drop shadow added to my layer, we get this very distinct shadow falling away from our shapes. If we double-click on our smart object, however, the shadow vanishes from the shapes, or at least it does within the smart object. Those shadows are still there on the original file. We have simply entered our smart object, and the shadows we added remain on the outside of it only. Going back to our main project, we see the shadows are still very much there. The cool thing about working with smart objects is that we can also work creatively with them, as I'll demonstrate now. If we decide we want additional shapes to be painted on our project, the first thing we can do is double-click our smart object to open it. We can then draw an additional shape within the smart object. Now, if we click back over to our main project, you may wonder why the new shape we just painted has not appeared. Well, another nice thing about smart objects is that you have to save changes within our double-clicked smart object before they will be visible in the main project. We can either go up to File and choose Save for this newly open project, Or we can close our Inner Smart Object project with the little X button, and when it asks us if we want to save our changes, we select Yes. In our main project, now that we have saved those changes, we can see the additional shape we added inside the Smart Object. However, that is not all we gained by adding that new shape to the inside of our Smart Object. That new shape has also inherited the same drop shadow layer style we added to our Smart Object earlier. Any layer style on the Smart Object layer will apply to everything within that Smart Object, even if elements are added after our layer style was first introduced. Smart Objects are therefore not only a wonderful way to keep your Photoshop project safe and organised, but also a fantastic way to apply layer styles and similar visual effects to your project. Effects and adjustments can actually be far easier to edit when they're applied to a Smart Object. Sometimes it would actually be impossible to make changes to some of them without applying them to Smart Objects. If we go to the Image menu and then Adjustments, we can find additional image adjustments to choose from. However, when we add one of these effects usually, like brightness and contrast, once we have made our adjustments to it, it is not possible to reopen that menu and make extra changes. We can see here that on the layer we added it to, it has just become a permanent part of that layer now. Unless, that is, we apply one of those adjustments to a layer which has been converted into a Smart Object first. Now, we see that our brightness and contrast adjustment is listed on our Smart Object layer, and if we double-click the adjustment, we can edit it. We can do this as many times as we want, making endless changes. That would not be possible without the use of Smart Objects. As amazingly useful as Smart Objects are, the next part of our non-destructive toolkit may be the most powerful way to protect your files and allow future editing. In all of my many years learning Photoshop, the following way of working instantly became the default way I edited images once I discovered it. It is that good. I'm talking about the wonderful world of layer masks. Layer masks. As we saw with the crop tool, removing parts of your image does not have to mean they are permanently gone. Typically, the eraser tool in Photoshop would be the most obvious way to remove things from your image, but unfortunately, unlike the crop tool, there is no simple tick box that we can click to preserve our original image. If you erase things with the eraser tool, they are removed permanently, which is where layer masks step in as the perfect replacement for the eraser tool. They allow you to do everything you can do with the eraser tool, with the added benefits of it being possible to fully recover anything you have erased at any time. The easiest way to think of a layer mask is to think of it as a stencil. With traditional painting, if you were to attach a stencil to something and then paint over it, only the open areas of the stencil would receive paint. The parts of the stencil that were solid would stop the paint from transferring over to the surface. A layer mask works this same way, by applying a mask to our layer and only allowing the unmasked parts of that layer to be visible. A layer mask actually looks a lot like a stencil when it's been applied to a layer for this reason. Those masked parts of the layer still exist despite not being visible, and they can be revealed again at any time by altering the layer mask. To use our stencil comparison, imagine if you could change the shape of your stencil after you had painted with it, and the previously painted area would magically change itself to that new shape. That is just how powerful layer masks are, and why they are an essential part of any professional Photoshop workflow. We can add a layer mask to a layer by selecting the layer we want to add a mask to, and then pressing this little Layer Mask button here. It is easy to remember this is the Layer Mask button, as it looks like a stencil. By pressing this button, we can see our selected layer now has a white box next to it. That white box is our layer mask. Our layer itself looks exactly the same within Photoshop, despite it having a layer mask, because at this moment in time, our layer mask is set to not mask any part of our layer. We can see that our layer mask is a solid white square when we first add it. Any part of a layer mask that is white in colour will be visible and non-masked. By default, Photoshop waits for us to tell it what we wish to remove, so we start with a fully white layer mask. With white being the colour of 100% visibility, you may have guessed that black would be the colour of 0% visibility. If I quickly make our layer mask fully black, our layer appears to have been erased, but as we can see from our layer preview, our image is still intact next to our layer mask. It is just being blocked from our view by that fully black layer mask. We therefore have to paint black onto the parts of the image that we wish to mask, and paint white onto the parts of the image that we wish to be able to see. This is as simple as using a paintbrush and painting on our image, with one very important reminder. So if we just grabbed the paintbrush tool and painted on our layer, we could end up painting with black or white directly onto our image itself. On our image layer, even with a layer mask added, we need to make sure that the layer mask itself is selected when we want to use it as our paint target. We know when our layer mask is selected, as it will have this white indicating square around it. Painting with it selected paints onto our layer mask and not our image layer. If we instead select our image preview on the layer and not the mask, we can paint on the actual layer if that is what you wish to do. For now, I will keep the layer mask selected. With the layer mask selected, any painting we do on our image will be applied to our layer mask. So in this case, I can paint with black to erase parts of our image, and paint with white to bring those parts of the image back again. As you can see on this zoomed-in preview, while we make these kinds of changes, our layer mask preview is updated to show where we have painted black and where we have painted white on our image. A wonderful thing about layer masks is that we do not have to work using purely black and white paint. If we paint with shades of grey, we get partial visibility. In this example, we can see that we have a mask that goes from white on one side through to black on the other, with all the shades of light to dark grey in between those extremes. With the mask looking like that, our image goes from a fully visible layer, where the mask was white, through to a gradually less and less visible layer until the mask reaches a point of absolute black and our image vanishes. Truthfully, that is all you really need to know about how layer masks work. You have to remember to switch to your layer mask when you want to erase something, but that is really about it for strictly essential information. Layer masks are incredibly powerful in terms of what they can do, but they are remarkably simple to use. I'm going to use the rest of this section to show a cool trick that can be done with layer masks and take you through the common keyboard shortcuts that make the process of using masks much quicker. As I said before, shortcuts are only a way to speed up your existing work process, so do not feel you have to learn them all now. Feel free to revisit this upcoming part of the video in the future as needed. Aside from the easy ability to recover lost work, layer masks have another massive advantage over the eraser tool. You can use effects and tools on a layer mask in the same way they could be used on an image more generally. As the most obvious example, we can select our layer mask, go up to Filter, Blur, and select one of our blurs, such as the Gaussian blur. By changing our level of blur in this effect window, we can see that only our layer mask is being blurred, not our image. You can do a general overall softening of a mask in this way, but it's also possible to use the blur tool on a mask directly, if you only want to soften small parts of it. You can also use the smudge tool to drag around your mask, as if the mask were wet paint. Again, without affecting the actual image on the layer. In terms of useful layer mask shortcuts, here are the ones I personally use, and they make the process so much quicker for me. Again, it took me a while to learn these, so do not feel you have to pick them all up today. But here we go. If you want to see your layer mask in more detail, it's possible to preview it by holding down your Alt key and clicking on your layer mask. If you want to leave this preview, simply Alt-click on your layer mask a second time. On a Mac, you have to hold down the Option key instead of Alt to do this. You can also deactivate a mask without deleting it, by holding down the Shift key and clicking the mask you wish to switch off. You'll see this red X which indicates the mask is switched off. If you want to reactivate it, shift-click or simply click on the layer mask again. There are many selection tools in Photoshop, allowing you to select parts of your image that you wish to alter. You can press the W key to bring up the Quick Selection tool and hold down on the Quick Selection tool icon to reveal the other selection tools. Where this is relevant for layer masks is that it is possible to convert a selection into a layer mask. With part of your image selected, which is indicated by these little marching ants, you can press the Add Layer Mask button. Your selection will then be automatically converted into a layer mask instead, making it even easier to create layer masks. You can also convert a layer mask back into being a selection by either holding down the Control key or the Command key if you're on a Mac, and then left-clicking on your layer mask. If you want to invert a mask, making the black parts of it white and the white parts black, you can do so by holding down either the Control key on Windows or the Command key on Mac, and, with one of those held down, you hit the I key, I being for invert as a helpful way to remember it. If you want to move a mask from one layer to another, you can hold down the left-click button on your mouse and drag a layer mask to another layer. If you instead want to duplicate a mask to another layer, you can hold down the Alt or Option key as you drag the mask to create a copy of that layer mask, without moving the original mask. If you drag a mask onto a layer which already has a layer mask, Photoshop will ask you if you wish to replace the layer mask that was already on that layer. Clicking Yes will replace the original mask on that layer with the one you were dragging. To quickly change between using black and white paint, you can press the X key. Pressing the X key switches between your foreground and background colour, which, when you have a layer mask selected, should be black and white. If for any reason your foreground and background colours aren't black and white, you can hit the D key to reset them to be black and white again. When I am masking parts of an image, I tend to have one finger hovering over the X key so that I can quickly press it to switch between masking and unmasking parts of an image. When you work in this way, it's like having a pencil with an eraser on the end of it. It feels very natural and intuitive to work in this way, I find. If you want to fill an entire layer with black or white, it's easy to do so. With your layer mask selected, you can either go up to the Edit menu and select Fill, which allows you to choose what you wish to fill your layer mask with. Or you can do what I do, and select your layer mask, hold down the Alt key while pressing Backspace. If you're on a Mac, you would hold down the Option key while pressing the Delete key. What this keyboard shortcut does is fill your layer mask with your foreground colour. Remember, if you accidentally fill your layer mask with the wrong colour, you can hit the X key to toggle your foreground colour to either black or white as needed. Finally, for this section, we will be talking about brush-specific shortcuts. The secret to masking things as efficiently as possible is having as much control over your brush as you can. Again, as with the rest of this section, shortcuts are not required to produce amazing work with Photoshop. But learning the shortcuts for tools you use every day, such as the paintbrush, can be an absolute game changer. With your brush tool selected, you can right-click at any point to bring up controls for the brush. From this menu, you can change the brush size and hardness. However, there are a few other, easier ways to do this. You can also press the open and close square bracket keys to increase or decrease your brush size. Those same open and close square bracket keys can be used to change your brush hardness if you also hold down the Shift key while pressing them. For a more immediate way of making those changes while painting, you can hold down the Alt key whilst also holding down right-click on your mouse. If you then drag horizontally, with those both held down, your brush size will increase or decrease. If you drag vertically, your brush hardness will increase or decrease. You can adjust both of these before releasing the Alt key and right-click. On a Mac, you can also do this, but by holding down the Option and Control keys instead. I also believe you use left-click to drag instead of right-click with Macs, but that may vary depending on your settings. I appreciate there were a lot of shortcuts there. I can only say once again that you slowly learn shortcuts over a number of years, through repetition of common tasks. I really cannot say enough that trying to stuff your head full of them is not the way to go. So if any of these shortcuts jumped out to you as a way to improve your own working methods, give them a try. But otherwise, let us move on to our final lesson. Lesson 5. What is colour? So, colour is a surprisingly big topic. Far too big to get into fully for an introductory video like this. It would probably be possible to make a video twice the length of this one that was focusing purely on colour. But the good news is, you only really need to know the absolute basics. Colour in Photoshop is made up of three main parts. You have the colour itself, how intense that colour is, and how light or dark you want it to be. Those three elements are all you need to create any colour. For example, here we have a bright red, which is the colour red at full intensity and as bright as it can be. This pink is using the exact same colour of red and the same brightness level, but we have reduced the intensity of it, making it a less intense red, or pink. And for a very dark red, we just have to reduce down the brightness. If we reduce the brightness completely to 0, we will always end up with black, regardless of what colour we started with, as without any brightness, how would we see our colour? Similarly, if we have a colour with maximum brightness, such as this red, and we reduce the colour intensity to 0, we get white. With maximum brightness but no colour, we will end up with white, as where would the colour come from? We can actually demonstrate what is happening in a really fun way. Here we have a shape made of multiple colours. However, each of these colours has one thing in common. They all have an equal level of brightness. Therefore, as I reduce the colour intensity of the image to 0, so we have no colour information at all, we will be left with just the brightness levels. And since all the brightness levels were the same between the colours, it goes from being a block made of multiple shapes to simply being one rectangle of grey. It takes a little bit of time to get used to this push and pull of the three elements which create colour, but as you experiment with it, it is not that complicated. I think the complication in learning about colour comes from the way it is presented in programs such as Photoshop. The second you start to deal with colour in any kind of depth within these programs, you start being confronted with mysterious acronyms such as HSB, HSL, RGB, CMYK, LAB, or LAB as it's commonly called. You can see these colour spaces as they are known within the menu Image, Mode in Photoshop. Thankfully, whilst each of these combinations of capital letters is rather complicated if you wish to master them, you only really need to know what these letters represent to understand all you really need to know as an average user. In essence, each of these groups of letters is a different way of expressing the three parts of colour that I told you about earlier. Where before I used the terms colour, intensity and brightness, I could have instead said hue, saturation and brightness, or hue, saturation and lightness. The other acronyms also represent the same three elements of colour, but they are specific to certain creative workflows. RGB refers to red, green and blue, and it's the dominant colour system or colour space used for screen-based media, so for films, TV shows and basically anything that you view from an electronic screen or projector. If you were to look at most screens under a strong magnifying glass, you would see that the images on those screens are made up of multiple small groupings of red, green and blue lights. By changing the percentage of each of these three colours, it's possible to produce any colour you could want. White light, for example, is simply made of red, green and blue, but because the colours are so small, and due to the way our eyes perceive colour information, we see that tiny combination of red, green and blue as white. Here's red, green, blue, and white when magnified on a standard backlit screen. And here's what happens when we combine them to get colours such as yellow or purple. CMYK refers to cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, as these are the standard colours that printer ink comes in. You will notice that while we have black ink, we do not have white. Well, the white from the paper we print on makes up for that. White in prints is usually just a lack of ink on a white page. It is possible to get specialist white ink cartridges and to manually replace the black ink cartridge for a white one for specific print jobs, but that is not typical. Now, the lab colour space is generally not one you will find yourself worrying about unless you work in certain specific fields. So lab, or LAB, refers to lightness and then two axes on a grid. One axis is marked A and the other B. A is green to red, B is blue to yellow. This way of showing colours far more accurately depicts how the human eye actually sees them. So for any industry where perfect 100%, not 99.9%, but 100% colour accuracy is needed, such as high-end manufacturing or medical research, they are more likely to use lab colour. But remember, while you have the option to edit in the lab colour space within Photoshop, you are still going to be viewing their edited image on an RGB monitor. An RGB monitor is simply not capable of showing the full spectrum of colours that the lab colour space represents. This is the main reason that most people don't use lab, as while you could precisely define the colours for your image based on far more subtle colour variations, not only would you not be able to see those variations on your own screen, but neither would your audience on theirs. It would be a bit like producing colour television shows in a world where everyone owns a black and white TV, including yourself. I bring it up so you know what it is, but it's not something you are likely to accidentally stumble upon or suddenly have a boss throw at you. If you are in a professional field that requires you to understand lab colour, you will have received formal training in how to work with it. To kind of wrap up this section on colour, I can demonstrate just how interconnected these colour spaces actually are. So if we go up to the top right, we can see our colour panel. If we double click our foreground colour here, we bring up the colour picker. In the bottom right, you can see that we have HSB, RGB, LAB and CMYK represented. We can see that at the moment we have this blue colour selected, which under RGB gives us a reading of 255 blue and 0 for red and green. Again, each of these colour spaces are measured using different systems, with 255 representing 100% with RGB. As I drag around my mouse with the colour picker, we can see that every colour space shown here updates itself at the same time. Dragging to white makes all of our RGB values become 255. As they would be red, green and blue maxed out to 100% to simulate white on a screen. Meanwhile, the CMYK fields have all been reduced to 0% ink, as the white will come from the paper and not the printing process. Again, while there are differences in how these systems are used, as you can see, they are all different ways of measuring the same colours of your image and not something to be afraid of. As an extra tip, if you're not working in the CMYK colour space, but you're curious to know how your work may look when it is printed, there's a quick way to preview it. Within the View menu, you can select Proof Colours, and your colours on the screen will automatically be adjusted to give an idea of how your screen-based colours may be represented in ink once they have been printed. You can also use the shortcut Ctrl and Y on Windows, or Command and Y on a Mac to toggle your proof preview colours on or off. If you want to get even more advanced with this preview, you can go to View, Proof Setup, to change which type of colour proofing you wish to see. Instead of seeing a standard print preview, you can even select to see how the image would look to someone who is colourblind. And within the Custom menu, there are many more types of preview options specific to certain devices. You want to see your image in black and white as a preview? You can do it here. You can even select to see how your image might look in a Japanese newspaper. Whilst most people tend to leave this on the default of working CMYK as a print preview, if you have a certain device that you wish to test your colours with, this menu is incredibly valuable for you. Again, not everyone will use print previews, but I feel this is a piece of information that may help you stand out in a job interview. With our main lessons complete, I want to say a few things to inspire you and increase your confidence as you go forwards in your Photoshop journey. Congratulations! We have covered a lot of ground in this video. And we have also looked at a lot of topics. My major purpose in making this video was to demystify Photoshop for you, and hopefully reduce the worries and fears you may have had about using the program. I have a really strongly held belief that a fear of making mistakes is the #1 thing that stops people learning new skills. I have made a lot of tutorials in my time with this channel, and I receive a lot of comments. The comments that have always interested me the most are the ones that demonstrate just how nervous some people can be while trying to learn a new skill. I may say in a video something like, "I'm going to make this woman's dress blue, as I think that's a nice colour." And I will likely have at least one comment from someone asking, "Is it also possible to make dresses green? What if it's not a dress that I'm changing the colour of? What do I do? Can I change the colour of a shirt in the same way?" And my first thought is always that, rather than try to experiment within the program and see what the result of that experiment was, they have instead taken the time to leave a comment and wait for a response before taking what they seem to have believed was a big risk. So I really hope that by watching this video, you will have seen that while Photoshop is sometimes a mess of menus and confusing terms, behind the program are some very simple systems that allow it to work. And that with the correct working methods, making mistakes never has to be something that you fear. Feel free to experiment and have a good time with doing so. You will make mistakes during your learning journey. That is okay. That is incredible actually. You cannot make mistakes if you do not try new things. And if you do not try new things, you will not learn. In more cold-hearted practical terms, everyone has different reasons for learning Photoshop. But I can say with confidence that by learning what this video covered, you will already be ahead of a lot of people working in the industry when it comes to understanding Photoshop. Believe me, I have worked with other people's project files in the past, and it is shocking how many people do not use things like layer masks. So do not be nervous if you are applying for a job or some sort of higher educational course. Truly understanding the program will always put you above those who have only learned how to do something and not why we do it that way. With all that said, I have other tutorials that deep dive into more specific workflows. So if you have not had enough of listening to me, feel free to give those a watch. Thank you for your time and happy learning.